You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Matt Migaki, the vocalist of Cryptopsy and the host of the Vox and Hops Metal Podcast, where I sit down with fellow metal musicians. We talk all about their lives and music while sharing killer craft beers. If you've ever wanted to sneak backstage and share a beer with one of your favorite musicians, well, Vox and Hops is the podcast for you. This week on the podcast, I dropped a killer episode with Johannes Ekström of Avatar. There is this episode and over 440 other ones to help you enjoy life, metal, and craft beer. So what are you waiting for? It's time to become a Vox and Hops head. Cheers!
It's that time again. It's that time of year all of us gearheads look forward to. It's almost Black Friday. And I know I'm eyeing some of my favorite manufacturers hoping to score some good deals. And I'm sure that you're watching your inbox and all that stuff for those deals too. I know you are. Don't lie to me. You totally are. But one thing you may not see in your inbox is the 40% off deal that Gunstreet Wiring Shop is doing. You've been looking to upgrade the wiring harness in your guitar. You've been hearing these ads. You've been curious. You've seen the workmanship. You thought it was intriguing, but weren't quite ready to squeeze that trigger. If you go to Gunstreet Wiring Shop's Reverb page, starting officially on Black Friday on the 23rd, you will see 40% off of all of the stuff on there, which is huge. I'm not even sure how he's doing that, but I don't ask questions. When I hear about a deal, I just communicate it to the people. So go to Gunstreet Wiring Shop's Reverb page and check out everything they have starting officially on Black Friday, the 23rd. Do it. Do it. But that's not all. No. We've got more Black Friday action coming at you from the boys at Sinasoid. But they're playing it close to the chest, as it were. They're keeping it kind of on the down low. So if you really want to know and get in early and score all the best deals, you need to join their super secret customer group on Facebook. I know that, but they're serious about this. They wanna, they don't want just anybody climbing in there and scraping up all the best deals, getting early access and all that kind of stuff. No. That's not how they roll. They want the best and the coolest people to be getting in there. And I know you want to be one of the cool kids. That's why we started playing guitar in the first place, right? Trying to impress the ladies and playing Wonderwall around the campfire and all that good stuff. That's what this is. No, this isn't it at all. That's not what this is. But you can get great deals on the custom cable of your dreams. I don't know what all these deals are. I haven't been privy to some of this stuff. So join the super secret customer group, and the link is in the show notes for that. Or you can search for it on Facebook, whatever is easier for you. I would just click the link. Just go in there, clickety click. It'll take you right where you need to go. I'll make it so. Don't worry. And I don't know what kind of deals they have, but I'm sure they're going to be banging. So go check that out. One more thing, and then we'll get on with it. I know, I'm sorry. I'll be as fast as I can. I mentioned Black Friday, right? That's coming up. You guys heard that in the last two spots? Okay, good. So Reverb.com is also doing a Black Friday, and if you go to tonemob.com/reverb, yes, this is kind of a new thing. You go to tonemob.com/reverb, click through that link. It's going to take you to Reverb.com, and you will be able to do all your shopping as normal. You'll be able to buy whatever you're going to buy on their Black Friday deals. I think they've got some things marked down up to 20% on Reverb, which is kind of crazy and awesome. You will be able to buy those, purchase as normal, and a little percentage of that will come back to the show and help keep the thing going. It's a really cool opportunity for you to get your, basically it's a have your cake and eat it too situation. tonemob.com/reverb. Buy whatever you're going to buy. And if you haven't heard of Reverb up until now, which I would be very shocked if that was the case, you sign up for an account, that helps put some wind in the sails too. So anything you do through the tonemob.com/reverb link will help out, and that will be linked in the show notes. So if you found a Black Friday deal you can't live without, hit that link. It'll help us out. Okay, enough of me yapping. On with the show. Blast, I forgot. One last quick thing, just a note about this show. The internet really did a number on Scott's audio. I don't really know what happened to it. It was not what I was hearing while we were recording, but when I downloaded the files, it was really wonky sounding. So I EQ'd it and tweaked it around the best I could to get it to a more acceptable kind of place, but for some reason it just sounds like there's a weird filter on the whole thing, which, like I said, was not there while we were recording. But I wasn't about to throw an entire episode away because it's a great talk, and he really shares a lot of information on this that I think you guys will be very interested in. So there you go. On with the show. I just wanted to give you a quick warning about that. Okay, bye. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the ToneMob.com podcast, the show about guitar tone and the people behind it. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today, I have, returning after a long time. I mean, so long. I have Scott Marquart with Stringjoy. What's happening?
What's going on, dude? Yeah, it's been years. I was trying to think of the last time we talked. I feel like I was like episode, I don't know, 12 or 15 or somewhere there in the teens.
I want to say like 7. Like maybe even earlier. I don't remember.
What a great honor.
I could be getting that mixed up. Yeah, it was an early one, and then, things have changed dramatically for both of us since then. And I thought, we should get you back on and rehash some of that. So I don't know. It's been so long. Maybe we want to pick up where we left off last time.
I haven't talked to you in years. It's been just 3 years since we've caught up, right?
Oh, right. Yeah, you and I never talk ever. For the audience who probably does not know this, a lot of industry guys do, but Scott and I work together on a variety of projects. So we talk probably 3 times a week. So that's one thing that's changed dramatically. 3 times being conservative. If we're being honest.
That's on a slow week. So we're different in so many ways. Even then, I wonder how much I knew about you when we last spoke compared to now.
I think you didn't know anything about me, and I didn't know anything about you, let alone, having visited your town and, hung out with you in your new shop and all that stuff. So I guess maybe the best thing to do would be to kind of pick up where it left off. I know we talked about your musical backstory and all that kind of classic stuff the first time, so people can go back and listen to that if they haven't had the chance. So I don't want to rehash that all again, but what has changed for you and your company in the couple years since we last recorded the conversation?
Shoot, man. Yeah, about everything. We've moved offices 4 times now since we last spoke. Back then, I think I probably had like 2 employees. Now there's 10 of us. So, a much bigger team. And I'm not even sure how many sets of strings we were selling, each day or a week back then. But it's almost surely, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 times as much now. So all sorts of crazy growth all around. I mean, ultimately, I think when we last spoke, I knew a lot about guitar strings, especially, being that that's something that not a lot of folks in the world know a ton about. But gosh, I mean, this is probably a biased perspective, but to me now, I feel like I know just like infinitely more than I did back then. I was in many ways still being mentored by some people that had been making strings for a long time back then. And, kind of long since surpassed that and developed a lot of new things on my own and learned so much. And I don't know, it's crazy. It's a whole different world.
Yeah, I know, that there's been some major changes in the way that you kind of run the operation, obviously. And but what are some of the things that you've learned about through like string construction and all the techniques and stuff? I mean, I know a lot of this stuff already because we've talked about it so much, but what are some things that you didn't know at the time that you think the audience might find interesting?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I guess.
So, I mean, one of the biggest things is probably that back then we were using entirely ratios for making strings, which I'll explain what those are in a second, that came to us from the late luthier Jimmy DeQuisto, who's was a bit of a genius when it comes to creating hollow body and solid body guitars. And had a string company as well, and my mentor in this learned from that company as well. So I kind of had a lot of that sort of knowledge and info passed down to us. But while we've kept some of those, and in many ways, we've really honed in on and perfected a lot of those things even better now. So for people out there that don't know what that is, if you're making, let's say a 50 gauge guitar string, there's a couple different ways that you could make that, because you have a core wire in a guitar string, and then you have a wrap wire that goes around that core wire for all wound strings. And there's a couple different ways that you can have ratios of those two things that will add up to your finished gauge. So like two off the top of my head, I have to do some quick math. So you could use like a 19 gauge wrap wire and math. Sorry, these things are sometimes a little bit hard. And a 16 gauge wrap wire, which would add up to 51 if you are doing the math at home, because you got to count that wrap wire twice and the core wire once. The thing to know about that when I'm talking about these things are that when we make a guitar string, we're actually sort of shrinking the wrap wire against the core wire. So in many ways, like, the whole is a little bit smaller than the sum of its parts. But so, you could make that with a 19 core wire and a 16 wrap wire, like I was saying, or you can make it with a 17 core wire and a 17 wrap wire. And, which of those you pick has, a lot of different effects in terms of playability, how flexible it is, durability, what the actual string itself sounds like, all sorts of stuff like that. So, in many ways, over the course of these years, we've done a lot of studies and a lot of experiments with players that we have here, as well as friends that I have that work in engineering departments at nearby colleges, to study a lot of these things and sort of come up with what I think are, an even better sort of perfect combination for all of our strings. So what that means when you have a better combination of those numbers, your better recipes, is that a string, number one, will intonate perfectly on almost any guitar with very little adjustment. It'll sound the way that you want it to in terms of the right balance of body and brightness, and it'll play the way you want it to, where it's not too flexible, but it's flexible enough, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been one of the biggest things. Back then I was in many ways using things I had inherited, and then along the way made a lot of little tweaks and perfections to make those things better. And then, in addition to that, we've been just perfecting all sorts of crazy stuff about our equipment. Basic things like where you're dampening the wire when it's hitting the core wire, to get like the most perfect possible wrap. We've had a lot of different modifications and adjustments and things like that on our winding equipment that we've come up with. And we're still coming up with stuff all the time these days, to make a better string at the end of the day and make a more consistent string. But I think one thing I would say to summarize this is that I think a lot of the other companies that make strings, in many ways, like, they have their recipes and their techniques that they developed back in the 60s or what have you, and they can't really change those or modify them because, I think they've got a lot of players that have been playing their strings for 30 years, and if they woke up one day and got a pack of the same strings and they were different, that would be a whole lot of backlash. So I think for those guys, what happens a lot of times is they sort of, store up these improvements over time. They don't make them to their existing product line. And then, once every 10 years, they'll launch some new revolutionary line that adds in a lot of things that they've learned and, probably charge you more for it. One thing that we try to do a little bit different than that is, our strings do evolve. If we find a way to make a string better, we're not going to release that as some premium product and then keep making the thing that wasn't as good. We will just make it better. And I think a lot of players that play our strings, they might not necessarily know that. And it's, it's not that things are changing in this drastic way, but if we find something that intonates better and sounds better and we can test that and show that, we're going to go ahead and make things that way. So I'm kind of proud of that as a company, I think we're able to always keep improving and continue to improve things over time so that our products don't get stale or get surpassed by other product lines from other companies.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to go about it. And you mentioned something a while back where you were talking about working with some engineering departments in the local college. I think if you could talk about that a little bit more. I know quite a bit about what you're speaking of, but just the level that your friend Mason has went into studying some of this stuff is pretty fascinating. I think people would be interested to hear, like, there's a lot that goes into it. Like, strings, for all intents and purposes, are metal wrapped around metal, right? As we've talked about many times, but there's so much more to it than I ever imagined. Like, in talking to you, I never thought that I would care or know this much about strings, and I didn't know there was this much to know. But like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
some of the testing he's done, and like what as much as you can without making people's eyes glaze over, because we're certainly nerdier about it than your average guitar player.
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, first, let me, so people know what I'm talking about, let me like rattle through a few of the different things that you can change to make strings different. So, assuming that you're keeping all your materials the same, you're not even, switching up the materials you're making your core wrap wire out of. There's not only the ratios, like I was just talking about earlier, there's also how much torque or tension you're hitting, you're putting on the wrap wire as you're getting it around the core wire, which can affect, how large your string is overall at the end with that shrinking process that we were talking about before. There's the angle that wrap wire will hit the core wire as you're winding, so that you end up, with just the right amount of space between windings or no space between the windings. There's the tension that you have the core wire under. We wind our strings at tension, much like you'll play them on the guitar, but there's an infinite range of tensions that you could use on that core wire, and those have a result on the string as well. So there's all these different factors that are at play in making a finished string, and every company does do them differently. So to your point, Mason, who his name's Mason Hickman, he was my freshman year roommate at Vanderbilt. We played in a band together, and now he's a PhD candidate at Vanderbilt in civil engineering, and he's studying material sciences. And he's taken on as his sort of main thesis project, I think I'm saying that right, studying guitar strings and trying to like be able to eventually build out a computer model that will let us input these different sort of variables and be able to determine the range of possibilities that will happen based on them. So it's really cool. He's built out this rig that basically he bought like a guitar body and has it strung up with like a single string, and he has a robot that will pick it, based on different speeds or torque amounts or things like that. And he's able to measure all the different properties of the string. And then he'll do other sort of tests on strings as well, whether that's break testing or fatigue testing, where you're really just like wearing out a string and seeing how strong it is. So he's been doing all this stuff, and he's got a bunch more work to do. So we're learning more stuff all the time. But I think being able to quantify things about different strings, and we're not just studying our own strings, we're studying strings from all the different string manufacturers. It's been really powerful because, like I'll always string up strings on a guitar regularly. I'm always experimenting. And I can tell a lot with my ears and with my fingers. But having that other layer where you're really able to quantify what the actual sonic spectrum is of a string, or what it tests out to on fatigue tests and things like that, that is like just a totally different paradigm. For us to be able to see all that information about different strings and then try to infer why that is, or how different elements of the process change certain things. So yeah, to your point, I mean, strings seem so simple. And you can think of them simple. I mean, you could run a string company and still think that strings are simple. You could just wrap wire around wire and then put that out and not really give it a second thought. But I mean, I'm a big nerd, so to me, being able to learn all these things about it and find ways that we can improve, it makes it more fun. I like thinking that every year we're making even better strings than the year before. Not that they've ever been bad, but just that there's always opportunities to improve.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it's kind of a fresh take on things in a lot of ways. To your point, like you said, it'd be really difficult for one of the bigger operations to just suddenly, oh, we found out we've been doing this wrong. or
Right.
not, maybe not wrong per se, but we would like to do it differently because we like it better this way. But we've got, a million guitar players that like it this way, and so we can't just change.
Yeah, exactly.
Type of
It's a nice
type of thing.
opportunity for us to be nimble. I mean, and so people like really understand what that means. Let's say you were a big string company and you had a 49 on your low E, and you were making it one way, and then you found another way to make it. Well, if you do that, even if that other way is better, all those people that have been playing your strings, forever and had their, probably adjusted their bridge to intonate well for those strings like 10 years ago and maybe haven't touched it, it's going to throw off the intonation on a lot of those guitars, maybe very subtly, but that could cause a really big disaster, especially if you can't really communicate to your customers why that is or how they need to adjust for it. So it's a great thing for us to be able to be nimble, and I do think it's a unique area that we can kind of fill in the industry. There are obviously some big guys in the string world that I'm not going to rag on their strings. They make great stuff at like a really, really tremendous clip. I think if you don't mind me making an aside, it makes me think of like every craft brewer that I've ever talked to. If we ever get to talking about Budweiser or something, you would expect those guys to just rag on them and be like, they make terrible beer. But that's not true. They're always like, it's amazing that they have 20 different plants where they're making beer, out of like different seasonal varieties of hops and stuff. There's always changes in agricultural products. And yet, despite that, like they make a Budweiser taste like a Budweiser every time. And, they don't really raise prices. Like it's really impressive to be able to do that. So when you're running at a scale, I mean, just to be able to make that many strings, without having big quality issues or having things be inconsistent from one string to another, that is impressive. So I do admire those guys. But for us, it's not just about how many strings we can make as fast as possible. It's about trying to make something better. I mean, that's by being a newer company and a smaller company, we have to be better if we want people to be able to support us. So I think it's cool to be able to do that, but also not to be too hocus pocusy and juju-y about why things are better, but to be able to actually test and demonstrate and base things on actual numbers.
Yeah, actual, real, measurable things. That's really cool, and I think I know that those some of the bigger companies do these things, obviously, but it's just it's hard to turn a ship that big. It's like it's easy for a speedboat to kind of just turn around, but a tanker can't do that. It's just
that's exactly right.
It just is a different thing. That's all really fascinating stuff. I still find it intriguing to kind of watch the process and to talk through some of these things that we've been talking about, off the air for so long. Is like, well, what if we tried? We've talked about, well, what if we tried, wrapping, winding at a higher tension? What if we tried winding at a lower tension? Just like, I never, ever, ever. I remember the first time you contacted me, quite literally, the first thought I had was like, how are we going to talk about strings for an hour? And now,
and how many hours have we talked about strings since then?
Oh man, like, I mean, quite literally, probably hundreds at this point. I mean, it's kind of insane.
And to your point, I think you can't emphasize enough how big of a difference these little changes make. If I were to wind up some things under higher core tension and then lower core tension that are the exact same gauge, exact same recipe and everything, you could feel the difference. Like, absolutely. Just by shaking the string around, you can feel the difference in how slinky it is. So, I mean, when it can be easy to look at a brand, I think a lot of people feel like strings the way that I probably feel about toothpaste. That, you kind of stand in the aisle and, everything's, you got your cinnamon, you've got your minty fresh, and there's different brands. And like in the back of your head, I think you're just like, are these all the exact same thing?
Right.
Is there any difference here? And I think it's easy to forgive folks for thinking that about guitar strings, but it isn't necessarily the case. Although I should say, and maybe this is another topic to go into, but some of the very largest companies, in many cases, they are very much the same. You can choose to follow up on that or not. It's up to you.
Well, I think that there's been a long-standing sort of I don't know. I think the word is probably suspicion, because I don't think anybody really knows for a fact, at least not at the my level, the general guitar player level. Like, I think there's been some suspicion here and there throughout the years that like you said with the toothpaste, like, are these all the same? But they're definitely not. Not to say that some people don't manufacture for others occasionally, but as you've talked about, there's definitely a lot of different factories making different things.
Yeah, and
like kind of all across the world.
If you don't mind, like I've thought about like making a YouTube video, talking about who, how many string manufacturers there are or whatever. But it always felt like it'd be a little bit weird coming like directly from the Stringjoy channel. But your customers are super intelligent and super informed in guitar, so maybe this is a good avenue to talk about that, if that's all right with you.
Okay, yeah, whatever you feel comfortable kind of talking about. I don't really know how much to peel back the curtain on these things,
Cool. I'll take lead on it. There's always a question of like when you're inside an industry of something of like things that you should or shouldn't say. But this one I think is okay. So like there is a lot of suspicion. We probably talked about it on our last episode. That people that say like, oh, there ain't but one company that makes all the strings in the world. And that's not true. It's kind of an old wives' tale. I hear it at NAMM every time. People come up to the booth and are like, hey, did you know that there's only one company that makes all the strings? I'm like, what? Are you asking me that? If that was true, I would definitely know. But that's not really true. What it gets to is that there is definitely such a thing as private labeling, where manufacturers will make strings for other companies. That happens all the time. That happens in every industry. But there are also a lot of people that do make strings. So off the top of my head, I can think of 13 companies in the U.S. that like make sort of very like guitar specific strings, like electric guitar strings and acoustic guitar strings and bass guitar strings. So more than probably people think. There are definitely brands that you see out there. Okay, so let's do this. I've been like waffling around because I don't know if it's like wrong to list them, but I'll list of like who I can think of that I know make strings, if that's cool with you. We're gonna give some insider.
That's fine.
To the Tone Mob audience. So I think of them geographically. So in the Northeast, there's D'Addario, there's DR, and there's Labella. I think those are like the main three up there. And then you used to have Black Diamond down in Florida, though they recently got acquired by a company up in California. And then you have us in Tennessee, Mapes in Tennessee, who supplies a lot of the wire for everybody, but also makes strings as well. Up in Michigan, you have GHS. And then in Colorado, you have Kurt Mangan. I know he makes strings. And then out on the West Coast, you've got Cleartone, Ernie Ball, of course, and then GSM, who owns Black Diamond now. And I think that's like all of them that I can think of like the larger sort of things. There's like some other people that like have like, like a single machine. Like, Gabriel does stuff out west. You have, I think, Gary Goodman. There's a guy that makes like some crazy stuff like that. And then Kalium up in Washington too. So there's quite a few. But, it's a question of like where you draw the line between like, a larger operation or a smaller operation or whatever. But I say all that to say, like, there's a lot of companies that make strings. I think a lot more than some people probably realize.
Right.
It's a small group, but like a pretty strong group. And so the people out there, I'll leave it up to you, but there's probably some brands that you've heard of that weren't listed. And I might have glossed over somebody, so don't take my word as gospel. I'm sure I could have forgotten one or two or three people along the way. But I say that all to say, like, don't think that nobody makes strings. There's a bunch of us that do. We all do things slightly differently. We have our own particular ways of doing things. We probably all think that our way is best, and it's up to you to decide which one is best for you.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. And then, and then that's just the US, which is kind of, well, where we pay
And there's
most attention
companies
to,
like
just
Martin
simply.
that has their shop down in Mexico. And people that used to make stuff in the U.S. like Gibson and Fender and stuff, are like shops that have closed. Dean Markley used to have a big shop back in the day, stuff like that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And then there's some European companies that what I really realized in talking to you and paying more attention to strings in general, was how many string companies there really are. Which everybody you just named is pretty much who I think of, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's who I think of when I think of strings. But when I think it was Ernie Ball did that. Maybe it was Ernie Ball. Maybe it was, I can't remember. I might be mixing up two different product launches in my head. But Ernie Ball put out like a survey at one point. I think it was them that
It was
asked
them.
like
Yeah, I know what you're talking
what
about.
strings you were playing. Yeah, and I was like, whoa! There was like, I don't know how many different brands on there, and many of which I'd never heard of before.
I remember
So it's like,
looking at that too, and there was some on there that I didn't even know of, and we weren't on there, which is a great compliment.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Ernie Ball. Oh. Yeah, I mean, and that just shows you the scale of things too. Like,
Totally.
you guys have been around for a while. But like it's a weird section of the industry, I think.
Very
Even
much
weirder
so.
than pedals, which I'm much more familiar with. There's just there's a lot of brands. I never knew there were so many brands doing, and everybody, like you said, doing things just a little bit differently. It's kind of a weird world.
Yeah, it's crazy how many of them there are, and now I'm even like with my listing earlier, I'm even thinking of a few more that I'm like, oh, I can't remember if they're still up and running or if they have their own thing. So it's hard even for me, like being very inside of it, to keep track. There's always like there can always be companies that I haven't heard of, and like, oh, they got some machines too. So like, I think the thing that a lot of folks don't realize, and I've definitely tried to hammer home, is that like when we talk about like string winding machines, like they are that, but it's not I think how people think of them. I think people think of them as like fully automated things that just like you press a button and they spit out strings over and over and over and over again until you tell it to stop. And even like for the big companies, that's still not the case. Like they've automated a bunch of steps in the process, but there's still a person manning 8 to 12 machines that are all making strings. So it's more manual, but for stuff like us, like somebody's like touching the wire like a billion different times in different places, to make a string, and they're adjusting a lot of things. It's a lot more of a craft, I think, than some people realize. And even like your string companies out there that like take a super like hands-on sort of freehand style approach where they're guiding the wrap wire. Even the machines that make those like look the same as other machines. Basically, there's a few like little pieces that are missing, but it always looks like this big machine or piece of equipment. But it's not what people think of necessarily. I think of it more as a tool or a piece of equipment than I do some big powerful chugging machine that just does everything for you.
Yeah, I mean, what it really is, in function, now that I've like seen it up close, it's a lathe that's been like modified to not modified, but like that's the general function of it is
Yep.
that of a machine lathe. And anybody who works with that stuff, yeah, exactly. Anybody who works with those things know, like, those are not a manual, or they're not a automatic thing most of the time. There's a machinist working with the lathe to make whatever the lathe is making, and it's a very hands-on type thing. Like a machinist is a job for a reason, just kind of like a string winder is a job, because it's a specific thing that you have to learn how to do. No one is just born with either of those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I mean, to make a bunch of strings, to make hundreds of strings in a day, and like make sure that they're all good is it's tough. It takes a very specific person. We've got some awesome people that are winders for us, but they're not always easy to find. It takes a special type of person that can be really amazing at that.
Yeah, it's like kind of the repetitive nature, but then also you got to have a really good attention to detail and know what to look for.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing.
I'm only saying all this because I actually got to see it in person. Like I would have never, even like I've seen a couple different string operations, and it's like, wow, like this is it's kind of a fascinating process to watch. Honestly, it's like, oh,
guitarist
wow.
that I've ever had over here to the shop, they all are like amazed, like, oh, that's how they're made. Like almost every, like to a man, they've said like, I thought there was just a machine that just cranked these out all day. And that seems to be kind of what everyone out there thinks, for whatever reason. So it's kind of fun to be able to show people that things are a lot more involved in that, and a lot more of a craft.
Yeah, well, and even if you dig through like we've done before, or rather you've shown me, I should say, like the videos out there from like D'Addario and stuff, and it's like this is a very, like, at every level, this is a very involved process. They have obviously big, multi-function machines and stuff, but there's somebody there. It's very involved. It's almost hard to, it would almost be harder to not have a person. Like, I don't understand how, until we have robots that can move like humans, I don't see this process ever being fully automated.
Yeah, I would kind of agree. I mean, and for folks out there that are wondering, I mean, kind of like the biggest differences you'll see between some of the bigger companies and some of the smaller companies. These things are relative. There are small companies that have two machines that are as tricked out as any larger company. So it's, that's not always the easiest way to put it. But for a lot of the bigger ones, like, they will have sort of touch screens that are like pre-programmed. So for every combination of wrap and core, you can just sort of enter that in, and it'll adjust everything for you. And then the other thing is, like, ultimately because of that, because they have a lot of sensors and have these things, the motion and everything largely automated, one person is like usually manning like 8 to, I think in some cases as many as 12 machines at a time. So like they're loading the core wire on there, getting the wrap wire started, and then, hitting go, and then, loading the core wire and getting it started on another one, and doing that all down the line, and then coming back and taking them all off. Whereas for us, and I can't speak for every company out there, but like we have one person working on one machine, making one string at a time, watching that whole wind and adjusting things over the course of the wind to make everything as perfect as we can get it. And, where they have touch screens and things, we have a lot of manual dials and things like that, that I think are actually advantageous, because you can make these micro adjustments along the way instead of just like hitting a program setting. To me, I think that ends up with a better string at the end of the day. But, they would disagree, and they do things their way because that's how they want to do it, and that's totally cool. But I think you get to some of that level of making things in smaller batches versus, making things in like these very large sort of pre-programmed batches to get everything as uniform as possible.
Right. That's interesting. Have you, cause I mean, Stringjoy's gotta be, probably one of the newest string companies, even though you've been around for a while. It's gotta be one of the newest, at least that I'm aware of.
I think we're the newest that I'm aware of too. I mean, I know of one company that started just a little bit after us that is no longer around. But other than that, like we're some of the newest, I believe.
Okay. So have you found it, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Have you found it difficult to try to, like, for instance, we've kind of talked about this before, like a new pedal company, it's almost like it's kind of easier to differentiate yourself. It's like, maybe not now because there's so many, but early on it's like, oh no, this is a distortion, but look at all these knobs and switches we put on that nobody else does. It's like visually like, that looks different. With strings, it's like something you don't know if you like it until you buy it, take it out of the package, string it up, and play it for a little while. So have you found it difficult to convince people to try the new kid on the block?
Yeah, so there's like I have a few different like answers to sub questions of that. I'm like the biggest rambler you probably have on this show, but for one,
works for me.
Cool. Well, yeah, I guess you don't have to ask as many questions that way. But for one, speaking to players' responses, I suspected it to be in many ways harder than it has been. There's been so many players out there in general that I think are intrigued by what could be something more, with their strings than maybe what they've been playing. And so there's been a lot of interest in trying that. I kind of think like if strings were like pedals or something, it'd be like back when people were only really playing Boss pedals or something like that, and like you have to be the Robert Keeley or the Brian Wampler or those early people to convince people that like they ought to try something different. And so there's been a little bit of that, but in general, people have been super enthusiastic, and I think once they hear our message and hear what we're all about, they've been, intrigued to give it a shot. But that said, there are always lots of people out there that are like super brand loyal to what they play. And that's like super fine with me. The thing we always notice if we'll have ads or a Facebook post or something like that, there'll always be some people that comment like the only thing they comment is like the brand they play. We get a lot of those, whether it's like Ernie Ball. And you're like, yes, that is a company that makes strings. What's your point? So there's definitely those people that are really hardened in what they play, and that's fine. I didn't start a string company because I thought the other string companies were just making terrible quality product, and there was only I make the only strings out there that are good. Other string companies do different things, and those will work differently for different players. So. For players out there that love what they're playing and couldn't imagine anything better, like I've said a billion times, like stick with it. if you, no matter what it is, if you love something and couldn't, it checks all your boxes, like, why the grass isn't always greener, I guess. I think we make great stuff, but like, I say that only to say, if you married the best girl in the world, right? Like you don't need to, if she's perfect for you, you don't need to go knock on other doors. You got what you set out to get. But there's plenty of players, I think, that have wanted something more from their strings or something different from their strings. And we've, I think, been able to provide that for a lot of folks. So it's been a fun ride, being able to take that journey with people and find like so many comments that people are like, I just thought strings were just strings and didn't really matter. And then I put on a set of your strings and my guitar came to life. We get a lot of those sort of comments, and that is super cool to me because I feel like I'm, as much as I love strings and love getting into the nerdy details of how to make them better and better, I love bringing other people into that world too, and changing people's mind about something they might have taken for granted before. I take a lot of joy in that.
Well, yeah, you mentioned something that I thought was interesting that I will confirm for everybody, which is you didn't start a string company because you thought that other companies were doing a bad job. You started it because you're a huge nerd.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I say that in a positive way.
The truth is, Blake, like now I have enough distance from, starting up that I feel like I can say this. When I very first started a string company, the reason was just like very specifically because I was playing custom gauges of strings and I couldn't get custom gauges of strings anywhere else, without buying weird stale singles off the shelf at a guitar store if I could find them, or mixing brands or whatever. And I thought that was dumb. And I thought there might be space for, a company that could provide that customization for, that very small percentage of players, that care enough to like really get involved in what gauges they're playing and all that. It was honestly only once I got like further and deeper into it that I started finding ways to like not just offer custom gauges, but make strings that I thought were better, you know? So it really it wasn't that from the start. I was just trying to scratch my own itch. And then along the way of getting to know this, you know, found so many little or big things that, you know, I thought could be improved, or, you know, just done differently to, I think, you know, make a cooler, you know, even if not better, a more distinctive product or something that would work better for a given guitarist.
Work better for somebody like you, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like you're not going to make anything that you wouldn't personally enjoy using. You know, like, I know that about you.
Yeah, and that's
like, you should try this, and it's like, nah, that doesn't sound very fun.
Yeah, we definitely get a lot of requests all over the board for things, and there are some things that I'm just like, maybe one day, but not right now.
Yeah, and you know, certain things they take a whole nother level of you know, of what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you have to, like, certain things like flat wounds are a whole nother world. Like,
yeah, totally.
you got to do. I mean, it's the same process conceptually, but you got to do a lot of different things in order to make flats.
Yeah, you know,
which I know is something that's been on your radar.
Yeah, and we're very much working on that. I've got an old sort of grinding / polishing machine, which is basically a slightly deconstructed string winding machine that has sort of a clamp, you know, where you can attach some rouge and some paper of your choosing to a certain grit to get strings, you know, polished off on top that you need to make flat wounds. So I've been working on one of those. Blake's heard me talk about it a billion times. It's like my hot rod in the garage, like Tim the Toolman Taylor, that I've been working on forever. But it's coming close, and we'll be able to do that. But, you know, I was just going to say, I was telling you about this earlier, Blake, before we jumped on this. My buddy Mason, who I mentioned before, had just texted me earlier today. He was at like Guitar Center going to buy some flats, and they were going to cost him like $40. And he was like, "Man, what is it? What, like, is it just that these are longer that makes them cost $40 instead of, you know, $8 or whatever the heck for electric guitar strings?" So I wrote him up like a painfully detailed bit of exactly how you do that. So I was basically telling him, like, well, if you want to make a 100 gauge flat wound string, you have to start with a 23 gauge core wire, and then you tightly wrap 9 gauge on it to about 36.5 inches. Then you have to reverse everything and then wrap an 11 the opposite way to go just past that to about like 37 inches. Then you reverse it again and loosely wrap a 19 over it up to about 38 inches. Then you have to take that and then take it to a grinding or a polishing machine and then let it grind or polish off about, 0.004 to 0.005 off of its diameter, so that you have this nice smooth surface. This is just for like really heavy strings that you have to do this for the flat wound. And then you take it and you put, 0.005 or 0.006 thickness flat stainless steel ribbon wire. You wind that around the whole thing. And then you take it back to a grinder or a polisher and polish up the stainless.
Oh, can you hear me, Scott? I think I've lost you. 3 minutes.
Can you hear me, Blake?
There you are.
Blake?
There you are.
Okay.
What happened? Oh, I don't know what happened. You went dead while you were describing the last step of the process. I'll have to cut that together a little bit. Yeah. So after you wrap the flat, you just talk like you were never stopped. Because I don't know if it recorded or not. It probably did, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Then I'm
making a note to edit this.
Okay, no problem. I'll start like kind of midway through there, and you can find a good thing. And then you take the whole string and you take it over to a grinder and a polisher, and you polish down that stainless steel outer ribbon wire so that you have a smooth, polished flat wound string. So it's a heck of a process that's involved in making a string like that. And I think a lot of folks, even folks that probably play flats, don't necessarily know that. I mean, like, did you, for example, or I guess you probably did because you talk to me all the time, but I don't think most people know that like a flat wound isn't flat all the way down. You know, it's like a ribbon wire on the outside, and there's a round wound string right under there. So there's so much about strings that nobody out there knows, and maybe a lot of players don't really care to know, and that's fine. But I know so that you don't have to.
No, I didn't know that about well, I didn't even realize until talking to you, you know, this is probably a year and a half ago that you informed me about this, that heavy gauge strings are generally compound winds. I just thought they were just like a regular guitar string, just like one layer over a core.
Yep. Usually when you get to, when you're changing your strings, 60 and up, that's why you'll see like a taper, on the end. When you get to like 60 gauge and up, you're going to have 2 wraps, and then usually 90 gauge and up, kind of depending on the company and your recipe, you're going to have 3 wraps. So, I mean, if you have like a set of 5 bass strings, like your 45 just has 1 wrap, but then your 65 is going to have 2, your 85 is going to have 2, your 105 is going to have 3, and then your like 130 or 135 on the bottom is also going to have 3. So there's like 11 total wraps. So basically, like the process that you do to make like one regular electric guitar string happens 11 times in different directions to make a whole set of bass strings. So that's why they're more expensive. There's a big reason for it. Not to mention there's always like one other thing I should mention. Like with any string, like there's an opportunity for it to you can make strings that are bad. Like we throw out strings. That's like a necessary thing in order to put out great strings, I think. But when you're doing something multiple times like that, you might like there's so many opportunities. If something like crummy happens on the very last wind, you have to throw the whole thing away, and then like everything that happened before that is all nothing.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if the last wrap has an imperfection in it, and it's like, well, the other 3 were perfect, but this is no good now.
Yep, exactly.
It goes into
it gets
the
a lot more
recycling
expensive.
bin. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's such a process. So I know we've said it again and again and again, but I said the first time I talked to you, I didn't know that I would be this interested in strings. I think people are going to enjoy this episode. This is a very much a crash course in how strings are constructed, I suppose.
Well, and if we are going to give everyone like the full crash course on strings, I feel like I should mention one thing that I think comes up quite a bit, which is that when players kind of make that turn from maybe not thinking about their strings much into wanting to know a lot more about strings and customize things or find things that'll work better for them. What happens a lot is they end up using sort of online string tension calculators. And certainly like that's what I used to do. So like there's no shame in it. It can be kind of cool to explore and see what the different tensions are of different gauges of strings and different notes. But I do want to caution folks not to lean too heavily on them, because while tension is an important part of the puzzle, it isn't everything. So just because like all the tension numbers draw everything up just right for a given setup doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the best setup that's going to feel balanced and sound balanced. When we sell like our balanced sets of strings, it's a mixture of balanced tension and balanced tone and balanced feel. So like a couple examples of different things that make a difference there. So your tension on a given set of gauges might look just right, or it might you might be playing gauges that you've played before from a different manufacturer. But there's a few other things at foot. One being, the core wire in many ways is what's going to dictate the intonation of a given set of, or a given string on your guitar. So just because like the tension number looks good doesn't necessarily mean it's going to intonate unless it's intended to. And the other big thing is that the core wire that's in a wound string is in many ways what you're actually feeling when you're playing that wound string. So you want to be smart about like how that's laying out when you're building out a set of strings like we do for our our classic sets that a lot of people love and play. So like for us, for example, our Balance 11 set goes 28, 38, and 50 on the wound string. There's an 11, 14, and 18 up top, of course. One thing that we've sort of chosen there is that we're getting core wire that gets just progressively just a little bit heavier with each string in that set. Not too much heavier or not heavier at all. We want to have that very gradual rise in the thickness of the core wire in order for a set to feel truly balanced when you go to play it. But, for example, I've had people that came from a different manufacturer whose set of 11s went 30, 40, 50 on the bottom, and they'll build that set out with us. And while that is okay, it's not really ideal. Like for us, for example, or for a different company, the 40 and 50 you don't see in sets together for us because those have a too similar core wire to sit really nicely next to each other. You're going to end up with an A string that feels a little bit too powerful next to your E string, compared to what you're getting out of that E string. So there's a lot of different things, I think that are at play in building out a set that's going to be perfect. And while I encourage folks out there to definitely dive in as much as they can, just know that something like a tension calculator isn't going to give you the entire story about what's going to actually play really right on your guitar.
That's a good note, because that's something after you came on the first time I started looking at. Was I didn't pay attention to my strings at all prior to that show, other than I play 11s. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I play, and 11s are wonderful. And then after that I started looking at things like tension calculators and other things, and really oh, this is all interesting. And then would talk to you about it, and you're like, well, yeah, but there's more going on. I'm like, there's always more. It seems so simple, but there's always something more.
And 11s are a great example because I can make a 28 with a 14 or a 15 core wire. I can make a 38 with a 15 or a 17 core wire, and I can make a 50 with a 17 or a 19 core wire. So two different sets of strings that have the exact same gauges. On one, the core wire might go 14, 15, 17, and on, from your lightest to heaviest there. And then on another, it might go 15, 17, 19. And as you can imagine, even though the gauges are the same, those sets are going to feel way different and intonate way different and sound different too.
It's true. It's true. We've done enough experiments at this point. Well, you definitely have done a ton of experiments. And I don't know. This is all pretty interesting to me and other nerds like myself. So this has got to be one of the most on-topic Tone Mob episodes in a long while. We really did just hammer home on the string stuff. I think people who listen to this, if you really try to absorb everything Scott's saying, it can be a lot. There's a lot of numbers involved, which I'm not a numbers guy, but there's a lot here. And I think you probably know more about guitar strings now, the listener, than most people do. Most people who work in a store their whole lives probably don't know quite as much about guitar strings as you do now.
No, man. So that's the honest to God truth. A lot of people that work in stores, or heck, even a lot of techs, or luthiers sometimes don't know it quite at that level. Not that they don't know tons about other stuff, but I mean, we all the time. This will sound like whining. I don't mean it to, but I will have players occasionally be like, well, I'll tell them one thing, and they'll be like, well, the guy at the store said this. Like, well, he's wrong. He's never, manufactured guitar strings. I'm sorry. I don't say that to be a jerk or anything like that, but I mean, it really is a thing that almost nobody knows anything about. Maybe there's 12 or 13 or 14 companies in the U.S. that are really making it, and in each one there, it's not like every single person making a string necessarily knows everything about how they're constructed or why certain ratios are used and what you get from those. I think a lot of those people probably don't necessarily even play guitar. At our company, most everyone does, but that's not the case, for everybody. I remember when I went to the Gibson plant in Memphis, and somebody asked the guy, how many people that work here play guitar? And he sort of proudly was like, about 20% of us do. And that's normal. I mean, that's what happens when you run a manufacturing company. Just because you love playing guitar doesn't mean you're gonna, love manufacturing a product. And you can be great at manufacturing a product without playing. But For us, we have everybody here but one right now plays guitar.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, a good example of that is, Leo Fender famously.
Oh yeah.
You can still make a good product and not be the thing, but it is helpful. It is helpful to know, and that's actually another interesting point that I was just thinking of. I was about to say, in Nashville, it's going to be hard for the bulk of your workforce in any industry to not play guitar. In that town, anyway.
That's a good point.
But what I
like the one girl that works for me that doesn't play guitar, she was like, "Well, my boyfriend plays guitar, my roommate plays guitar. There's like 12 guitars laying around my house, right now." So it's not
she's still very familiar.
It's that foreign of a thing. She's just like, I just can't play
it. Well, and I was gonna say, to bring up something else that's kind of interesting. Correct me if I'm saying this wrong, but Stringjoy is the actual first guitar string manufacturer in Nashville, right?
Yeah, as far as I know. So there are two people if you're a student of guitar string history, which there are a few of, there are two things that you'd be like, but Scott, what about Showbud and what about Gibson? So Gibson used to make strings in Elgin, Illinois, back when they were, Kalamazoo. They kept that plant rolling for a long time until like the mid to late 2000s, before that one shuttered. They, as far as I know, never made strings here. And then Showbud used to make strings. Showbud, made some of like the world's most famous pedal steel guitars. They were actually they had like the loft space, I believe, of Robert's Western World in downtown Nashville.
Okay.
Their like office. I think it's still called like the Showbud Lounge. And they might have had the building next door that's now Jack's Barbecue. Anyway, they had strings too, but they did not make them, as far as I am aware. So yeah, after all these years of being Music City, nobody, to my knowledge anyway, has ever manufactured guitar strings in this town until now.
Which is kind of insane. I mean, yeah, it's entirely possible that somebody did at some point, but I think we would probably know. You would certainly know, I would think.
That's the thing. It's like I leave a little bit of ambiguity in case there's just somebody for some reason got a hold of a string winder and had it out here for a little while. You never know, but I am as confident as one can really be that it has never been done here before.
Yeah, and that's kind of crazy. I mean, it's guitar. It's like the guitar capital of the world, and
yeah, totally.
Just now.
And it's a cool place to make guitar strings, man. In general, I mean, like we do tons of business, all over the States and internationally as well. But we do a lot of business right here in Nashville, and it's always an easy sell, for somebody from here. They're like, well, our strings are made right here in the city.
And come and see how it's done. How the sausage is made. So we've been talking for a bit here, and so we've stayed very on the topic of strings, which is just unacceptable. It's very unacceptable for a Tone Mob episode to be so focused.
For anybody that made it all the way through all that string talk, now we can talk about not strings. For the four of you that are still here.
That's right. We're closing in on the last few minutes here anyway, and I need to know. And now that we've ate pizza together multiple times, actually, I would like to know: has your pizza taste changed since we first spoke all those years ago?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, Blake, I have to say that I had. There's a few things that come to mind. One is I had something of a religious experience with you. What was the name of that spot in Brooklyn we went to?
Grimaldi's.
Yeah. Jeez, that was good.
That's gotta be really close to my number one, if not my very number one. That was amazing.
It's probably my number one, man. That was so good. And so Blake and I, we were out for Fear the Riff in August in New York, and we went to Grimaldi's with our ladies, respectively. And then I was like, shortly after that, I was in Chicago, and I had some Chicago style, and it was super good, though not as good as the New York. But the end of all this story is that by our new office on Elmville Pike in Nashville, there is a place called Joey's House of Pizza, and it is so good. Like it is amazingly good. It's like it's one of those things where like a Brooklyn family moved out here in the '80s. I have no idea why, and they have this pizza shop that's up on a hill right near us in like a very non-local restaurant part of town. You know, it's all manufacturing over here. They're only open from 11 to 3 every day. There's always a line out the door. If you don't know what you want, they'll yell at you, and it's amazing. It's so good.
I can't believe I didn't get to try that while we were there. We fully intended on trying that while I was in town.
We drove past it, and I kept telling you, like, I've never been there. I heard it's really good, and we didn't. Though we had 5 Points Pizza, and I love 5 Points Pizza too. Not
5 Points was great. Mm-hmm.
But all that is to say, I guess, you know, in my personal pizza journey and in my personal walk with pizza, I think it's been more of an education of the classics, you know, over these past few years than it has been, you know, in venturing out and exploring new things, you know.
Yeah. Well, Grimaldi's was definitely a top experience for me. I still think about it all the time. I'm thinking about it right now. And while we, you know, if we do happen to go back to Fear the Riff, something both of us, I think, missed the boat on, a really highly rated slice shop was right across the street from Fear the Riff, and I did not know. Pauly G's, yeah, Pauly G's slice shop.
I saw that on Google Maps. It's supposed to be good. Crap.
It's supposed to be really good, and I follow him on Instagram, and it looks really good. So for next time, if we happen to get to go to that, we need to make sure
maybe
we
next
don't
year,
neglect.
Man. Will you ask me about my board?
I'll ask you about your board in the Patreon section. How's that?
Oh, perfect. That sounds great.
All right. Oh, that was such a tease I just did. It was so bad,
wasn't it? The answer is the DS1, folks. Don't get too excited. Nothing but
it's just
one DS1. Sometimes 2 DS1s.
An unmodified DS1.
I like to run stereo DS1s with 2 different DS1s. That's my thing.
I like it. One into a crate and one into a gorilla.
Yeah, and one with a battery and one with one that's actually just hardwired straight into the plug in the wall.
Oh wow, this is intense.
Yeah,
this is very intense.
That's why you need split. You need 2 separate power splits.
You're educating me so well. Before we go ahead and sign off with this section, where can everybody find you? What do they need to do? And if is there anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, so Stringjoy.com is always the easiest way to check out our strings if, you know, I've convinced you to do that. If you want to know even more about nerdy string stuff, or to just go brag to the rest of the internet about all these things that you understand better than them because you listen to this, our YouTube channel is a really great place for that. It's youtube.com/Stringjoy, or just search Stringjoy and I'm sure it'll come up. Talk about a lot of crazy nerdy stuff just like this over there. And then, of course, my email continues to remain open to the public if anybody wants to holler or has any questions about what their strings should be or wants to tell me about their favorite pizza. And that is just scott@stringjoy.com.
Perfect. All right. Well, that sounds good. So for Scott, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones. There you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Scott and I have been wanting to do that for quite some time. As we said on the episode, we talk all the time and primarily talking about how to improve product and operations and just different ways of doing things down there at the shop. And it's I have a lot of respect for that guy and how he operates things and how he treats his customers and the products that he's really committed to putting out. And this has been long overdue, so I was really, really glad to do that, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. So this is episode 99. That means, you know, if you can do math at least as good as I can, which is at a pretty poor level, next week is episode 100. We've hit 100 episodes almost, guys. And this is amazing. I had no idea that this is what was going to happen. I had no clue when I started that we would be 100 episodes deep. That is a lot of hours of you listening to me blabber, and I appreciate it. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It is insane to me that this has happened. I don't take it lightly. So I hope all of you know how much I appreciate you tuning in. See, I can't even talk right. What am I doing? I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I think it's a really fantastic thing. So shoot me any comments or questions to info@tonemob.com. I don't know what's going to happen for episode 100. I had it planned out, and then something fell through. So we'll see. We'll see what's going to happen. Episode 100 will be a milestone regardless. So, again, thank you so much for making that even possible. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye. One last thing before we totally sign off here. I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gunstreet Wiring Shop. Yes, Gunstreet Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gunstreet as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gunstreet harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.